We're going to live in this house. You need to leave. It was at that moment that the cunning strategy of the calculating mother-in-law was realized. I had my doubts about my mother-in-law's unusual attitude from the beginning. However, my lack of attention led to a mistake that, in the end, caused the outcome my mother-in-law intended. I was filled with regret, wishing I could have made a different choice at that moment. But it was too late to take action. The divorce papers I impulsively filed were also part of her plan. However, I never imagined that my lack of planning would cause a significant disruption in her scheme. As is often the case in stories, schemes of people who are jealous of the successful and behave in a shady manner often end up not going as they had planned. In the end, only those who are sincere and kind receive the benefits of fortune. My name is Isabella. I quickly became close to my husband, Gabriel, whom I met through a friend, and we soon started dating. Gabriel was 9 years younger than me, but I was swayed by his earnest pursuit, and we got married. However, Gabriel's attitude changed significantly after our marriage. The affectionate gaze he once had disappeared, and his interest in me gradually faded. This change continued even after our child was born, and Gabriel showed no interest in parenting. His job involved frequent transfers, many of which were solitary assignments away from the family. It has been 10 years since we got married, but his return home has become extremely rare. Our son, Sean, is very shy and does not get along with his father, Gabriel. He always hides behind me when they are together. Feeling that I can't rely on Gabriel, I decided to focus on freelance work, which I could do without leaving the house. Since this job provided a stable income, there was no inconvenience in living with just Sean and me. In fact, despite Gabriel's repeated transfers and lack of promotion, I earned more than he did. I live like a single mother, but there is only one problem. That is the issue of living with my husband's parents. In contrast to our cold relationship, my in-laws get along very well, and I have felt envious of their relationship at times. However, after living together for a while, I realized something. On the surface, my in-laws behaved like a loving couple who understood each other, but in reality, their behavior was superficial. My mother-in-law, Helen, treated her husband, Michael, as if he were her own property. Knowing that he would never rebel, she used this to her advantage and bossed him around as she pleased. Justifying her behavior as a means of stress relief, Helen had a coercive attitude toward everyone, whether they were family members or strangers. Her self-centered and domineering behavior was obviously directed at me, who was living with them, and put me under mental pressure. Her pressure was not limited to domineering behavior. Even after 10 years of marriage, she constantly criticized and insulted me for being 9 years older than my husband, Gabriel. Helen often publicly said, "Poor Gabriel marrying an older woman. He deserves a younger and more attractive woman," hurting me. Ironically though, the one that proposed was Gabriel. She ignored that fact and continued to criticize me, hurting my feelings in the process. Even so, while living together, I did not want to unnecessarily worsen our relationship, so I had no choice but to endure in silence. Then, one day, I received an unexpected call from my father. When the phone rang and I picked up the receiver, I was informed by him that my mother, Mary, had been in a traffic accident. Shocked by this sudden news, I immediately rushed to the hospital where my mom had been taken. Arriving at the hospital next to my anxious father, my mother greeted me with a smile and said, "Really, your father tends to overreact. Don't worry, I'm fine." Seeing her healthy appearance and cheerful response, I was relieved that she had not suffered any major injuries. However, the doctor later explained that my mother had a fractured leg. Even after surgery, a full recovery was not expected, and she was likely to have difficulty walking. My mother eventually underwent surgery and was transferred to a rehabilitation facility to aim for recovery and return home. After 6 months of rehabilitation, she became somewhat able to walk, but she could not regain her previous freedom and needed a walker even after returning home. After she was discharged, I decided to spend a few days with her and realized that it would be difficult for my elderly father, who suffers from back pain, to support her daily life alone. As a result, I began visiting my parents' house frequently, juggling work, taking care of my child, and dealing with my in-laws in addition to supporting my parents. My mother-in-law, however, seemed dissatisfied with my choice to take care of my own parents and never offered me a word of comfort despite my busy life. Do you not feel ashamed that a daughter-in-law is neglecting her household duties? My husband and I are exhausted from work. Yet what are you doing? She continued to criticize. Despite feeling irritated by her words after my tiring days, I managed to suppress my anger and barely managed to respond with a forced smile. Feeling that I could no longer continue in this situation, I confided in Gabriel about considering living with my own parents. Well, that sounds tough. But, I'm busy with work. Gabriel responded with the expected lack of interest. Disappointed by Gabriel's half-hearted reception of my desire to leave the in-laws' house, I was disheartened. Well, my parents will manage somehow. What you want to do is up to you. Gabriel's indifferent comment pushed my patience to its limit, and I decided to live with my parents and proceeded with plans to build a duplex house. I informed my in-laws about my parents' situation and the de facto consent I had received from Gabriel. It initially seemed like my mother-in-law would try to stop me from leaving the house, but to my surprise, she smiled kindly and showed consideration for my mother. Oh, was it that difficult? Indeed, it's better to have them close. She responded warmly, which made me suspicious and sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't wholeheartedly accept the superficial kindness of my in-laws and remain cautious. When meeting with the contractor to discuss living arrangements while caring for my parents, for some reason, the in-laws accompanied me every time. Despite feeling uneasy, I couldn't refuse my mother-in-law's strong request and ended up allowing their presence. "We'll be fine, don't worry," they said, observing my consultation with a smile without joining the conversation, but I couldn't understand the meaning behind their actions. Nevertheless, the plans progressed steadily, and the duplex house for me and my parents was completed. Feeling that they were scheming something, I decided to hand over the keys while my mother and father-in-law were at work. After confirming that no one was home, I sighed in relief. That evening, while preparing dinner, my mother-in-law made a sudden, strange suggestion. "I heard the new house is finished. Can I see inside before you move your belongings in? I want to get some ideas for when we might need care in the future," she said in an unnaturally kind tone. Her attitude was clearly suspicious. Overwhelmed by her persistent requests, I eventually agreed to show her the new house the next day. I put the newly received keys in my bag and headed to the car. Strangely, I hadn't seen the father-in-law since the morning, and the mother-in-law said she had urgent business, which felt suspicious to me. During the drive to the new house, my mother-in-law was oddly engrossed in her smartphone in the passenger seat. Though I was driving and couldn't see the details, her behavior seemed unnatural. Arriving at the new house, she looked around restlessly, inspecting the surroundings, while I watched her every move with suspicion and caution. I did not let my guard down. Upon unlocking the front door, she suddenly pushed past me and boldly entered the house. Determined not to let a single scratch mar our new home, I threw my bag into the shoe cabinet beside the entrance and hurried after her. "This house is marvelous," she praised as she walked through the house with a bright demeanor. I closely observed her for any suspicious actions, but nothing seemed amiss at that time. Just as I was about to suggest we leave after my mother-in-law had thoroughly savored every corner of the house, I heard a noise from the supposedly empty entrance. Rushing there, I found my father-in-law smiling warmly. "Finally arrived. You can go ahead and bring the luggage," he called out, and as if on cue, luggage began to be carried in one after another. Confused by what was happening, I tried to stop the influx of belongings but was hindered by my in-laws, and before I knew it, everything was over. "What on earth is going on?" I demanded, and my mother-in-law looked down at me with a smug expression. "We're going to live in this house. You need to leave." At that time, the words uttered by her were beyond my understanding. Hurrying to the entrance, I checked my bag that was supposed to be there, only to find that the master key, which should have been inside, was nowhere to be found. While I was desperately searching the entrance area, my father-in-law appeared with a full smile and declared loudly, "Looking for this? From now on, we will live in this house. I would like you to leave promptly." Holding the master key taken from my handbag, the sight of my father-in-law looking down on me sent chills down my spine. Next to him, I saw my mother-in-law carelessly throwing my personal belongings outside the entrance. Their secretly planned scheme became clear, and I gave them a stern look on the spot. "I understand." I was at the limit of my patience. I quietly stated, feeling the difficulty of accepting the situation. I gathered my scattered bags and shoes and, while holding back tears, got into the driver's seat of the car and eventually left the premises of my new house. Heading straight from the new house to the city hall, I received the necessary documents for divorce proceedings, and upon returning home, I found that numerous essentials, including shoes and clothes that should have been there until the morning, were gone. It was only at that moment that I realized why my mother-in-law was glued to her smartphone during the ride. It was so she could coordinate a plan to take over the new house with her husband. Deeply disappointed, I headed back to the new house. When I pressed the intercom button, my mother-in-law's bright and satisfied voice reached my ears. As if to thwart my attempt to reclaim the house, she locked the door and peeked out through a small gap. When I handed her the divorce papers through the narrow gap, the documents unexpectedly swiftly returned with Gabriel's signature, just as I expected. "I'm glad I prepared beforehand. And thank you for leaving the house-related documents for us," my mother-in-law said smoothly. The mortgage and other related documents for the new house were kept in the new home so that they wouldn't get lost. I calmly tried to resist for the final time, but my mother-in-law coldly sneered at me. "I've already contacted the bank. We won't concern ourselves with what happens next," she declared. "I'm surprised at your naivety. We're already preparing for refinancing and other necessary procedures," she continued. Shocked, I returned home, quickly packed my and my child's belongings, and prepared to move, relocating to my parents' house within the day. About a month later, an unexpected call came from my mother-in-law. Wondering what it might be about, I answered, only to hear her screaming in an intense tone on the other end. "Wait, this is not what we agreed on. You deceived us," she accused me, despite the fact that they were the ones who had devised the scheme. "What exactly do you mean?" I inquired. My in-laws had deceived me and forcefully took the newly built house from me, thinking I had also already completed the refinancing of the mortgage. However, the miscalculation was, unexpectedly, on their part. Facing a demand for a lump sum repayment from the bank, my mother-in-law had been trying to secure a new mortgage from another bank. However, by proceeding with the contract without paying attention to the mortgage details, she committed two major mistakes. The first error was that the mortgage was solely in my name. My mother-in-law misunderstood that Gabriel and I had taken out a joint mortgage and was appalled at the lump sum amount she was requested to repay. Moreover, she naively thought that being co-borrowers meant only half the mortgage payment would suffice. But reality was not that simple. Repeatedly making unilateral demands at the bank, my mother-in-law eventually got denied and seemed to have ended up securing another mortgage using different financing. Yet, there was another crucial point that she had overlooked. Another miscalculation was related to their age. While I had some leeway in borrowing capacity and term, it was impossible for my in-laws, who were both over 60, to secure funds under the same conditions. My father-in-law had been working as a contract employee for years without a substantial income. My mother-in-law also worked part-time, however only in the mornings, which also didn't amount to much. With that in mind, it was impossible for the two of them to pay off the mortgage for that house. Without properly reviewing the repayment plan, my mother-in-law just peeked at my plan and thought paying the same amount would be fine. As a result, they received a bill exceeding their expectations by more than 3 times the amount. This call was from my mother-in-law, who, noticing an anomaly in their account balance as the payments began, contacted me in a fury. "There's nothing I can do even if you tell me. It's impossible for a full-time housewife like you to pay such an amount. I haven't received any explanation from Gabriel, and there must be something behind this. Tell me the truth, now." "What do you mean?" "There's no hidden agenda. In fact, Gabriel has not contributed a single penny to our living expenses since before our child was born." "What do you mean? Then who has been paying for the living expenses all this time?" "I've been working from home, so I certainly have an income. Besides, as far as I know, it's probably more than Gabriel's salary." At my response, my mother-in-law was momentarily lost for words, but I could easily imagine her being flabbergasted on the other end of the phone. Even when our family went out to eat, my mother-in-law and the others usually left the payments to me. "It's obvious that the daughter-in-law should pay," they would say, "but have they ever considered where that money came from? I don't know what the in-laws spend their earnings on, but it's likely that the two of them, having no savings, were relying on our income for their old age." Fed up with her selfish demands, I ignored her accusations coming from the other end of the phone and ended the call. After that series of events, the calls didn't cease to end, making my phone ring multiple times a day. However, I deliberately chose to avoid answering and consistently ignored her calls. This continued for days, which had a significant impact on my state of mind, but I was resolute. I eventually ended up living with my parents in my family home. Living with 4 people under one roof was more cramped than I had imagined. But by letting go of the new house, I had some breathing room in my financial situation. In anticipation of this new beginning and with my mother in mind, I decided to purchase a reasonably priced used home and renovate it for nursing care. My parents were fully supportive of this plan, and so the decision was made by the entire family. If we were to move, we decided to sell the current house. Surprisingly, selling off our family home went smoother than expected, and a buyer was found quite quickly. Moreover, since land prices were rising at that time, we were fortunate to sell it for far more than expected. This made the move to the new house much easier. The bank procedures also went very smoothly, thanks to the understanding staff. As a result, without any additional expenses, our family was able to acquire a new home. One day, a call from my mother-in-law once again reached me. For some reason, I was groggy that day, and without thinking, I picked up the phone and started the conversation. Her voice came through the phone. "Hey, Isabella, just a little bit would do. Could you lend us some money? After paying off the mortgage, we have nothing left, and we might even get our water service cut off if we can't make the payment." My family home unexpectedly sold for quite a high price. That's how we were able to buy the new house in cash. Why don't you try the same method? Despite the harsh treatment I had received, I was simply dumbfounded that she still sought my help. That's why I shared my experience of when we sold our home. Upon hearing that, her crying suddenly stopped, and the call ended abruptly. I was relieved, thinking that I would get no more troublesome calls from her. However, there were still issues remaining. A week later, another call came. "How many times do you plan to deceive us?" Her voice, suddenly berating me, was clearly filled with anger even over the phone. According to her explanation, their house was originally a built-to-sale house, which meant that the house itself had little to no value. Furthermore, because the location of the house was in a bad area, the land value had significantly decreased, leaving it almost worthless. In the end, no buyers appeared, and the in-laws were not only left without any income but also received bills for various handling fees. Since then, I stopped responding to my in-laws' frequent calls, blocked their numbers, and ignored any calls from public phones. Eventually, they seemed to have given up, and no more calls came through. Just when I thought I had regained peace, I got an unexpected call from Gabriel. "Hey, there's a for sale sign in front of my house, and I can't get in." Astonished by Gabriel's carelessness, I explained his mother's actions with a sigh. Gabriel was surprised when he heard my story, unaware of the events. But what really astonished me was his complete lack of reaction to the fact that we were already divorced. Gabriel was angry that the family home had been sold, but it was his mother's doing, and it had nothing to do with me since we were already divorced. A few hours after his call, he called again, apparently having arrived at his new home. However, all I could hear over the phone was the sound of disputes between my mother-in-law and her family. I later found out that Gabriel had a lover at the place he was transferred to. Having lost his home, he was considering living with his lover, but it turned out that his lover was already married. In the end, not only did Gabriel lose his lover, but he also faced alimony charges from the lover's spouse. He lost his job due to his parents' actions and is now working at a company that provides employee dormitories, with his income reduced to less than half of what it used to be. Additionally, I learned that the in-laws had imposed themselves on his new residence and were living there as freeloaders. After remodeling the old house and moving in, our family had started a new chapter in our lives. I have remarried Mr. Brown, an older man who kindly advised me on the house renovations. Having shared experiences of divorce and children, we immediately clicked and are now enjoying fulfilling days based on shared values. Mr. Brown is warm-hearted and actively helps take care of my parents, using his professional knowledge to quickly solve any problems they face, which is incredibly reassuring. While caregiving is challenging, I am deeply satisfied with my current life, living peaceful days with a trustworthy husband and lovely children. It seems my husband has been possessed by an evil spirit. This house will be given to Jenny. If you disagree, let's divorce. To think that the house I bought would be given to our eldest son's spouse. You better leave this house quickly. Ha. My husband sided with his daughter-in-law. I will put the house under my name. A monthly repayment of $1,800 is possible. Ha. My eldest son is also on his wife's side. Well, I'm no longer attached to such a dirty house. Then, as you all say, I will leave this house. You three will suffer from now on. Be on the lookout for what's about to happen. My name is Dorothy, and I am 60 years old. I hold a senior position in a leading company and have a higher status than usual. I live with my husband, Frank, who is 2 years younger than me. Last year, we renovated our house in preparation for the future. Our house was built by my father and has aged and deteriorated over the years. Therefore, we wanted to improve the living conditions to spend the coming years comfortably. However, considering our age, the monthly repayment amount is somewhat high at $1,800. But since I am an executive at a large company, the chances of passing the loan screening are pretty high. Frank works in management at a medium-sized restaurant but earns less than me, so the loan is more likely to be approved in my name. My salary alone makes it difficult to continue with the house loan. This house, originally belonging to your father, is currently registered in your name. I'm sorry, but could you take on the full amount of the loan? In return, I will contribute more to the household than before. After such a discussion, we decided to renovate. The renovated house has become more comfortable to live in, almost like a different place. It's very pleasing to know that by renovating the house I've lived in since childhood, I can continue to live here for a long time. I never imagined that the day I would leave this house would come. It was sudden. My cell phone vibrated. I'm getting married. My son Steve told me over the phone. Steve is 31 years old and works as a middle manager in a leading company. My eldest son, who has always been an excellent student, devoted to his studies and club activities, has continued to be enthusiastic about his work as an adult. That might be why I have never heard about his romantic relationships. I was very curious about the woman he was considering marrying. I wonder what kind of person she is. If Steve chose her, she must be charming. However, I'm worried that Steve, who has little experience in love, might be taken advantage of by someone with ulterior motives. I was filled with excitement and worry about meeting the woman my son brought home for the first time. Then, the day of the first meeting arrived. A woman with brown hair and a white chiffon dress, exuding purity, came to visit. I'm Jenny, please take good care of me. She was polite and charming, making for a likable first impression. I'm honored to meet you, father and mother. She smiled, showing her sparkling white teeth. If it's her, I can entrust my son with ease. I felt this way, and it seemed Frank shared a similar opinion, showing a smile. She's a wonderful girl. When Frank murmured that, she said, I'm so happy to hear that from you, Dad. I look forward to getting along with you. Gripping Frank's hand tightly and looking back at him. What's happening? Her intimacy surprised me, and I was a bit bewildered. Steve seemed surprised as well. However, a complex expression appeared on Frank's face. It wasn't jealousy, but it wasn't a comfortable feeling either. What are you doing? I asked, wishing for her to avoid such actions for my son's sake. She panicked. Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done this upon our first meeting. And quickly apologized, withdrawing her hand from Frank's. I'm often told that I don't understand personal space. It's not intentional, but I'm truly sorry. It seemed like it really wasn't intentional. Still, I was somewhat surprised by her actions, considering I initially had a good impression of her. However, Steve truly loved her. Yeah, Jenny might have a strange sense of personal space. Haha, but that's part of her charm. I'm not good at talking with women, but she approached me proactively. That's why we could become so close and consider marriage. I didn't expect Steve, who is usually passive towards the opposite gender, to change so much because of Jenny. Please take care of Steve. Despite various emotions, if she is a good person, everything will surely be okay. I accepted their engagement. Afterwards, things progressed swiftly, and within a few weeks, they had officially submitted their marriage registration. I wished for the best for their future happiness. One day, half a year after they got married, I'm home. When I returned from work, there were unfamiliar women's shoes at the entrance. Stepping into the living room, I found Jenny. Oh, Mother, welcome back. The table was littered with empty cans and bottles of alcohol. It seemed they were enjoying some drinks. What's this? I wondered about the two of them having a party without Steve. I happened to meet Jenny on my way back from work. We talked about wanting to get closer, so we decided to drink together. But since it was before payday and money was tight, I suggested drinking at home. Why have a party at home? It would have been ideal if Steve also joined, and we all could have had fun together. I don't want to intrude on the newlyweds, but it would have been better if we gathered at Steve and Jenny's place. I tilted my head and answered, Indeed, we could have done it at our house, but the beauty of this residence is exceptional, and our place is a bit messy right now. Jenny's speech was unclear. She was slurring her words, clearly quite drunk. Hearing her normally precise speech become lax under the influence of alcohol was unexpected. But what was the reason for enjoying the alcohol just between the two of them? Why didn't you call Steve? I found it unusual for a daughter-in-law to come to her in-law's house to drink, especially during the honeymoon phase. After seeing them together, I started to look for Steve. Steve is currently busy with work and working late into the night. Because of that, I've been feeling very lonely. Jenny said, starting to cry. It's okay, Jenny, you've done nothing wrong. The problem lies with Steve, who leaves you alone despite being newlyweds. Saying this, Frank gently stroked her head. Father, what is this situation? I feel increasingly uncomfortable. Look, Frank, Jenny is Steve's wife. It's wrong to do this, especially to Steve. I scolded Frank for his excessive behavior. And then, suddenly, oh, don't be so harsh on father. Jenny stood up for Frank. What? I reflexively uttered in surprise, confused by her statement. I had a lot I wanted to say, but the day's fatigue made everything feel bothersome. I'm going to take a bath. Please clean up after yourselves, I said with a sigh and headed to the bathroom. Afterwards, I called Steve to explain the situation, and he replied that he would leave work and come to pick her up immediately. Jenny's behavior seemed very odd to me. However, the fact that Steve rushed over to get her showed me how deep his affection is towards her. But I couldn't shake off the feeling that their future domestic life might be somewhat troublesome. Reluctantly, I decided to give advice about their future life when Steve arrived. While lost in thought in the bathroom, quite some time had passed. Returning to the living room with a somewhat dazed mind from the heat, Steve should have already picked up Jenny, but oddly, despite coming by car, they both seemed to be enjoying alcohol. "Steve, you came by car, right? Why are you drinking?" I asked, to which Steve, appearing drunk and cheerful, replied, "Actually, Jenny told me to drink, and it turned out we're staying over tonight. It's good news that my son is staying over." However, the unexpected accompaniment of his wife was somewhat concerning. The decision felt quite abrupt. "What?" I was inwardly astonished, but Steve had already drunk alcohol. "Hey, Mom can drive you. It's okay." I didn't want the daughter-in-law to stay over. Despite feeling tired, I offered to drive them home. However, Steve said, "Come on, it's okay. You're tired too, right? Why don't you join us for a drink instead?" With an innocent smile. At that moment, I found myself speechless without any room for argument. Haha, huh? At that instant, a feeling of discomfort sprouted within me. Suddenly, Jenny looked at me with a smirk, as if her smile harbored some conspiracy. Could it be? It seemed like she was laughing at my puzzled appearance. "It's just my imagination, right?" I truly hoped it was a misunderstanding, but in reality, her plan had already been set in motion at that point. The next day, Jenny apologized deeply for her missteps multiple times. "I am terribly sorry," she said before leaving, and I felt like peace had finally been restored, overwhelmed by fatigue. But when I returned home that day, Jenny was there again. Steve was nowhere to be seen. Disheartened by the previous day's events, there was a change in her demeanor. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience again, but I really wanted to apologize in person," she said, handing over some sweets. "I too lost my composure yesterday. I'm truly sorry." Frank seemed regretful as well. Seeing their remorse, I decided to forgive them this time. "I appreciate it." Jenny seemed genuinely relieved, but perhaps because the situation was quite awkward, she stopped visiting our home afterwards. Honestly, I did not want to get deeply involved either, so I was grateful for that outcome. Then one day, Frank, with a serious look, said, "I have something to tell you." As I waited in the living room, wondering what was going on, Steve and Jenny visited for the first time in a while. "It's been a while," I greeted, but they seemed to ignore my words and passed by as if they hadn't heard me. Perhaps my voice didn't reach them. Suddenly, Frank declared loudly, "This house will be given to Jenny. If you disagree, let's divorce." "What?" I was astonished. The discussion of transferring the house to Jenny came out of nowhere. It was a baffling situation. While I was confused, Jenny said, "Please, leave this place." What does she mean? I'm confused. Wait a minute. What do you mean by transferring the house to Jenny? I asked, to which Frank replied, "You've been making Jenny suffer, haven't you? That's unforgivable. She's such a good girl. Making her suffer. There's no such fact." However, Frank refused to listen to my argument. "Shut up. I heard it from her. That's why she was crying, saying she couldn't go home." Frank continued angrily, with Jenny shedding tears. "Why has it come to this?" Then Steve also burst out in anger. "I never thought my mother could do such a thing. You're horrible." The more I denied, the angrier they became, and Jenny's tears didn't stop. "That's why we're going to divorce. Leave this house immediately. I plan to continue living here with them." I couldn't understand why I had to transfer my own house to Jenny. When I asked for the reason, because Jenny is deeply hurt. We could have sought compensation, but we thought of a better solution. "Taking this valuable house from you and giving it to Jenny is the appropriate punishment for you," was the response I received, even though I didn't make her suffer. Why should I face such retaliation? It's impossible for Jenny, who quit her job after getting married, to pay a monthly loan of $1,800, I argued. "Don't worry. We'll change the name to Steve. As long as Steve is working, the name change should be possible right away." However, there are restrictions on changing the name on a loan contract, so it wouldn't be that simple. In reality, changing the loan terms wouldn't be easy. I doubt the bank will allow it. When I counted, Frank said, "Don't worry, not only you, but Steve also works at a letting company. Plus, I have an acquaintance at the financial institution where you have the loan. If I talk to him, it should go smoothly." Appearing fully convinced. "Yeah, a monthly repayment of $1,800? Piece of cake." Influenced by Frank's confidence, Steve also agreed. Gradually, the reality of transferring the house to them became apparent. "I've said it many times, but I didn't do anything to her. There's no way I'm handing over this house." As I strongly objected, they became furious again. I was fed up with this situation. Then Jenny, who had been crying all this time, spoke up. "Mother, for the sake of us and our unborn child, please," she pleaded while caressing her belly. Unbelievable. "Mom, Jenny is actually pregnant right now. If her mental state becomes unstable, it could lead to the worst-case scenario. That's why I hope you can be a bit more lenient." Steve revealed the fact of her pregnancy. Indeed, stress during pregnancy should be avoided. However, being forced to transfer my home based on unfounded accusations is unacceptable. My heart was filled with turmoil. "I need some peace and quiet," I said, leaving the scene for the bedroom. Could I have unconsciously made Jenny suffer? I pondered while lying in bed when I found a strand of brown hair on the bed. What's this? Both Frank and I have black hair, so finding brown hair here is strange. Could it be Frank? My heart was disturbed. After the recent troubles, to find such a shocking discovery was overwhelming. I was getting confused. What's in the world? I cried myself to sleep. Waking up late at night, I was headed to the living room when I heard voices inside. Apparently, Steve and Jenny hadn't gone home yet. I wished I could have joined the evening drink. Someone said, "But Jenny, you're pregnant. You need to refrain," was the response. Hearing Frank and Jenny conversing joyfully, it felt like there was no space for me. My heart was heavy due to Jenny's inexplicable complaints. Standing frozen outside the living room, suddenly, an intimate sound reached my ears. "Ah, Jenny, I love you." Frank's voice. "Stop it, Frank. If Steve and Mother find out," Jenny replied. Shocked, I was disturbed by what Frank and Jenny were doing. "What on earth is happening?" "Don't worry. Steve is completely drunk, and Dorothy has been cooped up in her room all this time. She must be asleep by now." Haha, they were discussing. Haha, maybe she's angry and hiding under the bed? How funny. Haha, they laughed together. The brown hair I found was probably Jenny's. This is very unpleasant. What were they doing on my bed where I slept? I felt sick. They intend to push me out and secretly enjoy themselves with Jenny. My house being used inappropriately like this. Fine. I'll leave this uncomfortable house behind. However, I won't forget this, I thought to myself. The next day, I appeared in front of the three as if nothing had happened. In reality, I couldn't sleep in that bed anymore, too shocked to even close my eyes. "So, you've finally decided to transfer the house?" They smiled all at once when I said, "I've decided to transfer the house." "Great. Let's go for the name change procedures. I'll easily pass the loan screening." Steve was excited. He knows nothing. Although it saddened me at the moment, I had no intention of revealing the truth to my son. He wouldn't listen to his mother since he was under his wife's thumb. At least not yet. Afterwards, busy days of divorce proceedings and name changes followed. The name change process wasn't easy, but it was eventually completed. "This house is no longer yours." Haha, Frank taunted. "Hurry up and leave, old hag." Haha, Jenny whispered in my ear. I felt nothing but anger. They were the ones who were supposed to leave. I intended to make them, but not before getting back at them. Letting go of the home I had lived in since I was born was painful. Yet, I could no longer feel attached to a place associated with infidelity. I planned to use this abnormal situation to create turmoil between them. Wait and see when the time comes. A month after I left the house. "I'm ready," is what I said and headed to my former home. As I pressed the doorbell, Frank responded irritably, "What do you want, stranger?" Despite it being our first encounter in a long time. "I have something to discuss. Won't you let me in?" I answered firmly. Why should I let you into the house? Frank stubbornly refused my entry. I have something very important to discuss, especially to Jenny. An important matter concerning Jenny? Frank's response shifted. Mentioning her name, they readily invited me inside. Using her name was the last thing I wanted. However, it was clear that Frank was heavily influenced by her, so I leveraged that. You're a stranger now. Stranger. Even though legally we're strangers after the divorce, that term felt too heartless. I was infuriated by Frank's reaction. Why are you here now? They became more guarded. I want you to see this, I said, displaying some photographs. What is this? Their surprised voices filled the room. The photos were of Frank and her on a date, captured by a detective I hired to follow them after our divorce, recording their moments together. Wait, what? This is... Steve was unsettled. So what? We're just daughter-in-law and father-in-law with a good relationship. Nothing more, right? Why would you take such meaningless photos? What do you want? They insisted they were just close. Really? Then what about this? I pulled out my smartphone and played a certain audio. I've always liked Jenny. Keep your voice down, or Steve and my mother-in-law will hear. Their voices and inappropriate sounds were recorded. What's this? On the day I discovered their relationship, I had secretly recorded their conversation. You're just misunderstanding. Frank desperately tried to explain. Misunderstanding? This is clearly a problem. Steve erupted in anger. Jenny just looked down. I pressed further. Let me ask you, whose child is in your belly, really? Steve's complexion changed. Could it be Dad's? He was lost for words. That's impossible. He always comes. Oh, she inadvertently confessed. You admitted it. You just said it. Their argument intensified and Frank and Steve got into a scuffle. Ouch! Jenny seemed to be in pain, which made them stop fighting. I seized the moment. Haven't I always said, I didn't make Jenny suffer? Did you lie to get rid of me, to convince Steve? Steve was shocked. No, I'm the worst. Why didn't I believe my mom? He blamed himself for being swayed by Jenny and doubting his mother. It's so clear now. We should talk about this. Steve raised his voice at them. Initially silent, with all this evidence, are you considering a lawsuit? Apparently, Jenny initially had genuine feelings for Steve. But upon visiting our newly renovated beautiful home before their marriage, she began to desire it. My family home was a bit run down, and I aspired for such a beautiful house. The interior was also quite lovely. She tearfully explained. Wanting the house, she decided to get closer to Frank, using opportunities when he returned from work to drink without Steve. The months she didn't visit the house, she became close to Frank, plotting to get rid of me. You could have just suggested living together from the start. When I said that, she remained silent before finally responding. I don't have a positive impression of mothers-in-law. My own mother and grandmother were always fighting, and my grandmother constantly bullied my mother. So, I wanted to avoid living with my mother-in-law. Getting rid of you was the only solution to live comfortably in a beautiful house. If she had such an image of a mother-in-law, she wouldn't want to live together. But to go as far as taking my husband. However, how did Frank perceive this situation? I knew I was being used, but I fell for her the moment we exchanged greetings, shook hands, and she smiled at me. Despite knowing he was being used, Frank fell in love and decided to abandon me to keep her by his side. You guys are really unforgivable, Steve said as both of them looked down, tears streaming down their faces. Steve decided to get a divorce. DNA tests on the newborn confirmed Frank as the father. I won't be paying child support, he declared, demanding alimony from them. I made a similar choice. I never thought I'd be demanding alimony from my own father. I gently patted Steve's head as he sobbed. Our lives were thrown into chaos because of a foolish woman's actions. However, the life that got thrown into chaos the most was her own, which she would regret forever. My prediction was spot on. 2 years later, she chose to continue living with Frank in a de facto marital relationship, claiming it was for the child's sake. And to work and raise her child, she had to leave her newborn at daycare. Today, Grandpa, Dad came to pick you up, huh? She seemed to attract attention from other mothers at the daycare. While the children played well together, she felt lonely not being able to make any mom friends. Additionally, when she explained her divorce and relationship with Frank to her parents, they got furious, directing their anger at Frank too. Now, she is estranged from them. This was all the result of her own choices. Meanwhile, Steve lives alone in that house. I wanted to sell it, but that would be too cruel to Mom. After all, this is the house where Mom has lived all her life. I couldn't sell a house filled with such memories. He felt disgusted by the house and considered selling it but couldn't due to guilt, possibly influenced by my repeated expressions of discomfort towards the house. He arranged for house cleaning and disposed of all possessions belonging to Frank and her. Steve, acknowledging the trouble caused by her, said, "It might be because of that woman, but I've troubled you, Mom. You might not be able to forgive me, but please let's meet up sometimes. Visit the house. And let me be a good son to you from now on." And gave me trip tickets. Steve has shown deep remorse. Although I can't forgive him just yet, I'm willing to work towards restoring our relationship.
If we are moving, let's choose a house with one more room than we are considering, for the sake of my parents. The moment I heard Tyler's words, despair spread in my heart. The reality of living with my in-laws weighed heavily on my mind. Throughout our marriage, I had been tormented by my in-laws meddling, especially my mother-in-law, who constantly made snide remarks and blamed me. I was often blamed for our decision not to have children. "Sarah, when will I ever see my grandchildren's faces?" It's truly heart-wrenching. I had heard these words many times, and they wore me down. Tyler did not stand by me, only remaining unresponsive. At times, he even seemed to agree with his mother's words and blamed me. Living with the in-laws would make my life even more difficult. I would have no free time and would have to live constantly mindful of my in-laws' eyes. Just thinking about it felt crushing. My father-in-law was also cold towards me, just like my mother-in-law. He always followed my mother-in-law's opinions and was indifferent and harsh towards me. Every time my in-laws came to our house, I felt their sharp gazes and my heart shrunk. Just thinking about these continuous days made my heart ache. Moreover, my in-laws did not understand my job and thought I should focus solely on household duties. I was proud of my job at the city hall and found self-worth through working. However, my mother-in-law repeatedly belittled my work, demanding perfect housework as a wife's duty. My father-in-law also had a negative attitude towards women working. If we started living with the in-laws, my free time would be completely taken away. I would have to live responding to their demands and under their watchful eyes. A crushing sense of despair dominated me. However, amidst this despair, an idea came to mind. It was to take advantage of Tyler's words, not to leave the elderly alone in the house. If my in-laws were to live in this house, I decided to have my parents live with us as well. So I decided to choose not just one extra room, but two. My parents are modest and kind, and they cherish me. Living with them would provide me with emotional support and serve as a countermeasure against my in-laws. I made up my mind to implement this plan and contacted my parents. I immediately took out my smartphone and contacted my parents. I honestly told them about my relationship with Tyler and my in-laws and shared the plan to love together. My parents listened to me with surprise. My mother said with tears in her voice, "It must have been hard being alone for so long," and my father strongly stated, "We will help you out since you have been enduring all this while." The call with my parents lasted longer than expected. I poured out all the feelings I had been holding in. My mother kindly responded and occasionally said with tears, "It must have been tough." My father also could not hide his anger and said, "Sarah, I didn't know you were suffering so much. I'm sorry." After hanging up the phone, I felt slightly lighter because I knew my parents were on my side and would support me. They also said they would start preparing for the move immediately. I believed that my plan would succeed and proceeded with the moving arrangements. Preparing for the move was harder than I thought. While preparing a room for my in-laws to make their stay comfortable, I also had to secure space for my parents. Arranging furniture and sorting belongings were tedious tasks, but I tackled them one by one. During this time, my in-laws became increasingly harsh towards me. My mother-in-law ordered, "Sarah, clean up properly," and my father-in-law coldly stated, "Such a sloppy daughter-in-law is problematic." However, I silently told myself, just a little more patience, and continued working quietly. One day, I received a call from my mother. She was concerned and asked, "Sarah, are you okay? Are you not overdoing it?" I replied, "I'm fine, Mom. The move will be over soon, so I'll hang in there." My mother insisted, "Okay, but if anything happens, tell us right away." My father also encouraged me, saying, "Sarah, you're a strong girl. We will be there soon, so just a little more patience." Encouraged by his words, I felt renewed strength. As I continued preparing for the move, I looked forward to reuniting with my parents. I believed that with them, I could become stronger and overcome living with my in-laws. As the moving day approached, I became busier. In addition to preparing for the in-laws' move, I also had to proceed with my parents' move. However, if this plan succeeded, my life would change dramatically. This thought made the busyness bearable. On the moving day, both my in-laws and my parents arrived simultaneously. My in-laws looked surprised at my parents, but I calmly explained, "I've decided to have my parents live with us too." My in-laws seemed unconvinced, but I argued using Tyler's words, "It's not good to leave the elderly alone in the house." My in-laws looked puzzled, but I responded firmly. My mother-in-law expressed her dissatisfaction. "Sarah, what is this all about?" I calmly replied, "If you both are coming, it is necessary for my parents to live with us as well." My father-in-law protested. "This was not what we planned," but I repeated, "I was told it's not good to leave the elderly alone, so I called my parents." Thus my in-laws and my parents started living together. The house became lively, and slowly, hope returned to my heart. The moving process went smoothly. My parents were helpful, efficiently moving the boxes. Meanwhile, my in-laws wore dissatisfied expressions, but I continued working undisturbed. My mother smiled at me and said, "Sarah, let's do our best together from now on." And my father reassured me, "If anything happens, just let us know." After finishing the moving tasks, I took a moment to thank my parents. "Dad, Mom, thank you so much." "I'm happy we can live together," I said. My mother replied, "We feel the same way. We'll support you fully so that you can be happy." My father added, "Sarah, I'm glad to see your smile." Observing our interactions, my in-laws couldn't hide their displeasure. My mother-in-law coldly asked, "Sarah, where will our room be?" I explained, "I have prepared this room for you. I've made it comfortable for you both," but she seemed unconvinced, responding only with, "Well, I see." That night, the house was temporarily enveloped in silence. In my room, I healed from the fatigue of moving, while harboring both anxiety and anticipation about the upcoming life with my in-laws. I didn't know how my relationship with them would evolve, but having my parents there made me feel stronger. Thus, our new life began. Although there might be conflicts with my in-laws, I resolved not to lose. With my parents by my side, I renewed my determination to overcome this challenge. As we started living together, a subtle tension lingered between my parents and my in-laws. My mother-in-law remained strict with me, but seemed slightly reserved towards my mother. My father-in-law avoided talking to my father. My parents, although a bit perplexed by their first experience of living together, were cooperative for my sake. My mother helped with the household chores, and my father handled home repairs and maintenance. Although the relationship with my in-laws was still strained, it gradually improved with my parents' presence. My mother-in-law continued her harsh attitude towards me, commenting on trivial everyday matters. "Sarah, this dish needs more work, or the cleaning isn't thorough enough," she frequently remarked. My father-in-law also said, "You should manage the house more properly," in a commanding tone. However, my mother calmly responded to my mother-in-law's attitude. "Mother-in-law, let's improve this together," she would say kindly. And to my father-in-law, "If there is anything inconvenient, please let us know." I was genuinely grateful for my mother's demeanor. My father also actively took on home repairs and maintenance, creating a better environment in the house. Whenever my in-laws expressed dissatisfaction, my father would respond, "I'll fix it right away," and his honest attitude gradually opened their hearts. The house slowly regained a calm atmosphere, and a peaceful air began to drift through. However, I had a faint feeling that this peace wouldn't last long. My in-laws were not planning to change their attitude towards me, and they gradually harbored dissatisfaction towards my parents. Especially my mother-in-law, who muttered behind the scenes that my mother's help with the household was a failure of fulfilling the daughter-in-law's duties. Amidst this, my mother encouraged me, "Sarah, it's tough, but let's persevere together." My father also said, "If anything happens, tell us right away," supporting me. Strengthened by their words, I faced life with my in-laws. One evening after dinner, my mother-in-law suddenly said, "Sarah, shouldn't your parents be a bit more considerate to this?" My mother apologized. "I'm sorry, mother," but anger welled up inside me. Despite my parents' earnest cooperation, my mother-in-law refused to understand. That night, I discussed the future with my parents. "Dad, Mom, let's think together about what we should do from now on," I suggested. My father said, "Sarah, don't push yourself too hard," and my mother responded, "We'll help as much as we can. Let's overcome this together." Thus, we renewed our resolve to face life with my in-laws. Despite the ongoing challenges, I believed I could get through them with my parents' support. Weeks passed since we began living together. My parents, initially tense, gradually adjusted to life in this house. I also found more moments to relax, and the home's atmosphere softened. However, my in-laws' attitude began to change gradually. My mother-in-law, initially reserved, gradually shed her restraint and returned to her strict attitude towards me. "Sarah, what's this? The cleaning isn't thorough enough," she began to nitpick again. My father-in-law also started to speak to me in a commanding tone more frequently. Meanwhile, my parents noticed this change in attitude from my in-laws and looked at me with concern. My mother always cared, saying, "Are you okay? Don't overdo it," but all I could reply was, "I'm fine." My father also said, "Tell us immediately if something happens," but I was prepared to resolve things myself. One day, my mother-in-law harshly criticized me. "Sarah, you really can't do housework. It's pitiful for Tyler to have such an incapable wife," she said. And I felt like exploding with anger. However, I restrained myself from responding and quietly left the room. The backdrop of my in-laws' changed attitude might have been influenced by the presence of my parents. My mother-in-law felt that my mother's assistance in household chores meant I was not fulfilling my duties as a daughter-in-law, and this dissatisfaction was directed at me. My father-in-law also harbored resentment, feeling that my father was taking over his role in home repairs and maintenance. During this ongoing conflict with my in-laws, Tyler found a moment to apologize to me. One day, while we were quietly spending time in the living room, Tyler suddenly spoke to me. "Sarah, I'm really sorry about how my parents have been acting lately," he said, and I could hardly hide my surprise. "What's going on, Tyler?" I asked. He was silent for a while before continuing. "I hadn't realized they were being so harsh to you. Seeing how hard you've been working lately made me realize it. I'm really sorry for everything up to now," he said earnestly. Hearing this brought a slight relief to my heart. "Thank you, Tyler. But I'm just trying to make sure everyone in the family can live happily," I replied. Tyler nodded. "From now on, I'll help out more. So let's work together," he promised. Those words began to restore some hope in me. Tyler's apology was a significant relief for me. I felt that his understanding of my struggles and his willingness to help might improve our relationship with his parents. However, in reality, his parents' attitudes remained unchanged, and living together continued to be challenging. One day, when Tyler came home from work, he asked, "Did my mother say harsh things to you again today?" I replied, "Yes, but don't worry about it." But Tyler insisted, "Don't say that. I know it's hard for you, so please tell me if something happens," he urged. His words lightened my heart a bit. Tyler even asked his mother to be kinder to me. But she retorted, "I'm saying these things for Sarah's sake." Seeing this, I felt in my heart, ultimately, my mother-in-law won't change. Still, Tyler's support became my strength. His kind treatment helped me continue to endure life with my in-laws. Our bond slowly deepened, and our relationship gradually improved. Throughout this, my parents continued to support me unwaveringly. My mother would say, "Sarah, talk to us anytime you're having a tough time," and my father also urged, "Tell us right away if something happens." Supported by their words, I faced life with my in-laws. As my relationship with Tyler slowly improved, I felt the time had come to make a final decision. Living with his parents had become unbearable for me. Even though Tyler had apologized and become supportive, as long as his parents' attitudes remained the same, I couldn't regain peace of mind. One day, I brought up a serious conversation with Tyler. "Tyler, our relationship will break down if this continues. I can't live with your parents anymore. For our sake, please consider living separately," I started. Tyler looked surprised but seemed to understand quickly. "I understand, Sarah. I respect your feelings," he replied. Relieved by his words, I felt a burden lift from my shoulders. We began preparing for a new life. We found separate living arrangements for his parents and decided to start anew. This decision brought light back into my heart. A few weeks later, the move for his parents was complete, and our life regained its calm. The day they left the house was also a new beginning for me. His mother said, "Thank you for everything, Sarah," in a formal goodbye, but I felt no genuine gratitude in her words. After his parents left, I proposed divorce to Tyler. "Tyler, I can no longer continue this," I said, and he silently nodded. "I understand, Sarah. I wish you happiness," he replied. Hearing this, I couldn't stop the tears. Thus, we officially divorced and each began a new path. New hope sprouted in my heart, and I looked forward to what life had in store. Life after divorce was not easy. Preparing for a new life and sorting out my emotions was necessary. The separation from Tyler, whom I had been with for many years, caused me great pain. However, I believed in my decision and encouraged myself. While focusing on my job, I continued efforts to adapt to my new life. Without the support of friends and family, I couldn't have overcome this difficult period. My parents continued to encourage me. Tyler and his parents struggled to adapt to their new life. They had lost their familiar home and were forced to live in a cramped apartment. Tyler, too, became increasingly isolated as he faced work and lifestyle stresses. Meanwhile, I gradually adjusted to my new life. Free from concerns about my in-laws and Tyler, I found joy in living at my own pace. I devoted more time to gardening and cooking, regaining peace of mind. Divorcing Tyler was a significant decision, but I believed it was the right path for me. My parents continued to support my new life. My mother encouraged, "Sarah, live for yourself from now on," and my father always said, "Contact us if you need anything." Months after starting my new life, I was satisfied with my new existence. Overcoming past hardships, I relished the joy of making my life truly my own. I led a much freer and more comfortable life than before. Work was going well, and I was fortunate to have new encounters. My relationship with a man I met through my hobbies was going well, and his presence became a daily joy. I kept in frequent contact with my parents, whose support strengthened me. As I began my new life, I had more time to reflect on myself. Having adjusted to my new life and regained peace of mind, I was filled with hope for the future. Ready to move beyond past struggles, I relished the joy of controlling both my personal and professional life. Through new relationships, I rediscovered the beauty of loving and supporting one another while dreaming of building a future together. Meanwhile, Tyler and my in-laws faced tough times. With my departure, they seemed to realize for the first time how significant my presence had been. One day, Tyler called me. "Sarah, how are you?" he asked, catching me off guard. "I'm fine, thank you." "How about you?" I responded. Tyler replied, "Well, managing somehow, but it's really tough without you." His words left me with mixed feelings. "Sarah, please forgive us. I truly regret how terribly we treated you," Tyler continued. His apology lightened my heart a bit. "Thank you, Tyler, but it's in the past now. We each need to walk our own new paths," I answered. The lives of Tyler and my in-laws became increasingly difficult. They struggled with adapting to a cramped apartment life, missing the spaciousness of their previous home. They began to realize their mistakes but found it impossible to go back. Tyler struggled to adapt to his new life environment as well, worn out by work stress and changes in his living situation. He often thought, if I had been kinder to Sarah, maybe things wouldn't have ended up like this. One day, my mother-in-law called. "Sarah, can you forgive us?" she asked, her voice filled with sorrow. Surprised yet composed, I responded, "Mother, it's all in the past. I'm enjoying my new life." Her reply came with tears. "Thank you, Sarah. We truly are sorry." I learned that Tyler and my in-laws were facing severe hardships. They had only realized the importance of my presence after I left, and they began to recognize their mistakes. The consequences of their actions towards me had come back to haunt them. Tyler and my in-laws had lost everything. They realized their choices had been wrong and were tormented by regret. However, there was no turning back. Their lives were tough and lonely. On the other hand, my new life brought me much joy. I was promoted at work and received high recognition. Relations with my colleagues were excellent, and I felt fulfilled every day. On weekends, I enjoyed gardening and cooking, refreshing my spirit. My relationship with John, whom I met through hobbies, also deepened. He became a significant presence in my life, and we supported each other daily. Time spent with him was healing, giving me hope for the future. I stayed in frequent contact with my parents, who rejoiced in my new life and always supported me. My mother said, "Sarah, It makes me so happy to see you happy, and my father encouraged. Continue on your path. Feeling the start of a new life, I had more time for self-reflection. I learned a lot from past events and managed to grow personally. Excited for the future, I was eager for new challenges. I held great expectations for my future. Overcoming past pains made me stronger and more confident in myself. Positively facing each day, I was excited for new challenges. Stepping into this new phase of life, I embraced the joy of building my future. I vowed to enjoy life to the fullest and walk alongside those I love. Though challenges may arise, I was prepared to overcome them all.
Still, 9 people is way too many. Are we all going to get along and play baseball or something? Ever since I was a child, I had harbored a dream. To live in a charming house like the ones in picture books and to play with a white dog in the garden. But reality was not so kind. Though I finally acquired a house of my own, when I returned from work, it had transformed, almost like a dormitory. I couldn't forgive what had happened. My name is Janet, a 32-year-old office worker. I had devoted myself to my job and worked hard. However, towards the end of my 20s, my friends started getting married one after another. I even went broke from the expenses at weddings. Gradually, I began to feel a sense of urgency and started to actively seek a partner. Janet, when will you show me grandchildren? My father would ask me the same question every time I visited home. Because of this, I grew reluctant to return, and my visits became less frequent. My mother passed away when I was young, and afterward, I was raised by my father, my brother, and my paternal grandparents. My brother married young and built his own house near our childhood home. He has 2 daughters, who are dear nieces to me. You have 2 adorable grandchildren already, so why do I need to have children? But still, you are. Each time, it turned into an argument. Then one day, my father had a traffic accident. By the time I arrived at the hospital, the situation was already severe, and my always energetic father passed away peacefully while our family watched over him. Dad, there was someone I wanted to introduce to you. At that time, I had a partner I met through friends. Recently, he had proposed and we had decided to get married. He tended to put on airs, but he was a kind-hearted person. His name was Steve. Having lost both parents and my brother having his own new family. It's going to feel a bit lonely, isn't it? After the funeral, back at home, I murmured such thoughts while stroking my cat, Candy. You're not alone, Janet. From now on, I'm your family. Steve, who was beside me, said that, taking my hand gently. He was concerned about me and came to check on me. Let's build a happy family together. I believed I could have ordinary happiness. At that time, I couldn't even imagine what would happen next. Welcome, though it's a bit cramped. We were welcomed by Steve's parents when we visited for me to introduce myself to them. His mother was very active and cheerful. I felt a bit nervous as soon as I entered the room. I thought we would be meeting just his parents, but there were also his grandparents, Steve's brother, his wife, plus their 2 boys. Nice to meet you. There were so many people. Steve's family home, built by his grandfather, felt a bit old and run down. To be honest, it seemed quite ancient. However, his family welcomed me warmly despite my nervousness. On our way back, I said to Steve, there were so many people today. It must be even more chaotic during holidays and Christmas. He laughed and replied, really, it's cramped. I wonder how they manage to live there every day. I was genuinely surprised by his comment. Steve's family home wasn't particularly spacious. I had thought it was just coincidentally crowded that day. Wow, 8 people in that house. That's impressive. According to my husband, initially, it was just his parents and grandparents, 4 people living together. But one day, his unemployed brother suddenly moved in with his wife and kids. Well, I guess he'll move out once he finds a job, my husband said with a laugh. At that time, I just thought it must be tough for his family. Since getting married, we haven't been blessed with children, but we live a leisurely life with my husband and our cat, Candy. My husband helps with the household chores, and Candy is fond of him. Some time has passed since our marriage, but my brother-in-law's family still lives in the same house. The walls are filled with children's scribbles, and my mother-in-law has accepted the situation, laughing it off as a joke. Vanessa, my brother-in-law's wife, always looks tired. She is older than my brother-in-law and close to my age, so we developed a good relationship quickly. Hey, Vanessa, hurry up. Janet, don't just watch, we're out of beer. When I visit my in-laws, Vanessa and I are usually the only ones moving around. We were constantly busy, hardly having a moment to breathe. I wondered if this was the fate of a daughter-in-law, but thinking about Vanessa facing this daily was genuinely frightening. Since my brother-in-law doesn't work, Vanessa works full-time. It might be a bit rude, but I asked her, "Have you ever thought about divorce?" "Yes, it's quite tough as it is, but I have kids. He used to be much kinder." I couldn't understand what she saw in my brother-in-law, but there must be something between them that only they know. It was during such times. "Hey, should we start thinking about building our own house?" One day, my husband suggested. I was surprised by his words but also felt joy inside. In fact, I've had a small wish since I was a child. To live in a lovely house like those in picture books and to raise a white dog in the garden. I had never told anyone, but I did share this dream with my husband, hiding my embarrassment. "That sounds great," he responded enthusiastically. Then we spent time visiting model houses and selecting a home builder. And after a year, our dream home was completed. "Let's work hard on the mortgage payments," my husband said. "Yeah, that's right," I replied with a smile. On the first weekend after our house was completed, my in-laws came to visit as a housewarming gesture. "Here, Dad, give them the celebration gift." "Excuse us." "Oh, what a lovely home," my mother-in-law said, looking quite pleased as if it were her own home. As I gave a wry smile, my father-in-law said, "Here, this is for celebration," and handed me 2 cans of beer that seemed to have been bought just then. "Is this all?" My brother-in-law wandered around the house, went into the bedroom on the 2nd floor, and exclaimed, "Bo, this bed is so comfortable," as he jumped onto it. Since the father did that, the kids also got excited, running around and shouting, "There's a cat." The children chased our cat, Candy, throughout the house. Candy, usually a loving cat, was overwhelmed by so many people and hid in a corner of the room. "I'm so sorry, Candy." Looking over at my husband and brother-in-law, they had already started drinking with my in-laws. "Janet, mother-in-law, is rushing for snacks. Can I use the kitchen?" "And I'm really sorry for scaring the cat," Vanessa said, apologizing. How can such a nice person be in that family? I empathized with Vanessa as if she were my own sister. "I'll do it, so you take a break, Vanessa." I said that, but Vanessa helped with the cooking while taking care of the kids. Steve's grandparents are always quiet and don't talk much. They were as silent as dolls, yet they commented, "What a wonderful home you have." "Really? We're sorry for being so noisy." It was Steve's parents who were noisy, yet the 2 of them apologized. His grandparents were very polite people. Ultimately, the problem seems to involve Steve's parents, his brother, and probably Steve himself. After that, Steve's parents and brother started visiting our house almost every weekend. They would party loudly until late at night, causing complaints from neighbors, and the police even showed up once. Steve's grandparents and Vanessa, along with her children, haven't visited our house since the housewarming, but Steve's parents come without hesitation, often leaving me with tasks to do. My patience finally reached its limit. Steve began to show his true character gradually. Once, when I was sick with a cold and couldn't cook dinner, I asked Steve, who returned home from work before me, to buy something for dinner on his way back. What Steve brought home was 2 servings of fried chicken. With no appetite, I reflexively said, "Why fried chicken? I can't eat this right now." Without getting angry, Steve replied, "What are you talking about, Janet? You need to eat properly and get better, especially now." If I could eat that, I wouldn't have asked in the first place. I thought to myself, Later, when Steve fell, I asked him with a hint of sarcasm, "Do you want fried chicken?" He replied, "No, that's obviously not going to work. What are you thinking?" He laughed as he said that. In the end, this family is selfish and lacks consideration for others. It's as if they've lost their humanity. They can do as they please now, but there will come a time they'd regret it. I decided that in my heart and smiled slyly. A few days later, it was decided that I had to go on a business trip. On the morning of my departure, "I'm off then," I cheerfully said to Steve. "Is your business trip starting today?" "Actually, Vanessa is also on a business trip starting today," he mentioned. "Really?" I had no idea. "What a coincidence," I replied, to which he laughed. "My parents are in trouble because they don't have anyone to help around the house." Seeing him laugh, I thought to myself, this man is terrible. Days passed busily while I was away, and a major storm hit. I asked Steve about the situation. "I'm fine, but the family home had some leaks due to the rain," he responded. I felt resigned thinking about the aging family home. The day I returned home arrived. As I approached my house from the station, I heard loud laughter. I wondered if someone was having a barbecue in their yard. It was so noisy that I thought it might cause complaints from the neighbors. Then I was shocked to realize the loud voices were coming from my own home. Hesitantly, I opened the door to find a multitude of scattered shoes and walls filled with scribbles. Stunned by this unexpected scene, Steve, already drunk, greeted me. "Oh, Janet, you're back." Angered by his blatant disregard, I stepped into the living room to find Steve's parents and brother also inebriated, with Vanessa busily preparing snacks for them. Steve's grandparents remained as calm as ever, while the children used the walls as their canvas, happily drawing. There was also an unfamiliar young woman present. There was too much information to process. I couldn't organize my thoughts. What exactly is going on here? I tried to have a calm conversation with Steve, asking him quietly, "What? Didn't I tell you?" "The storm caused a leak in the family home," he replied. "I understand that. But why here?" According to Steve, the family home was severely affected by the storm, and our house was chosen as the refuge for his family. While Vanessa was on a business trip, Steve, his parents, and his brother discussed the next steps. "We all thought it would be great to live here together," Steve proposed proudly. "What?" I couldn't grasp what he was explaining. While I remained silent, Steve's parents cheerfully said, "We're family, and there's enough space, so it's fine." "There's no problem, Janet. Sure, the walls are a bit dirty, but that's just the kids doing," my brother-in-law stated nonchalantly. "Who is that woman?" I asked about the unfamiliar woman relaxing on the sofa. "Oh, her? She's a friend of mine and Vanessa." My brother-in-law turned to Vanessa for confirmation, and she smiled kindly, saying, "Yes, that's right. She got kicked out of her place, and when she asked for advice, my brother said it was okay for her to stay here." My brother-in-law explained, "Nice to meet you." The woman responded, but I was completely lost. In the not-so-large living room, there were 9 adults and 2 children. The house was messy, and the walls were covered in scribbles. It was hard to believe this was a new home. The family was loud, creating an atmosphere like a dormitory. I became furious at the situation. Still, 9 people is way too many. Are we all going to get along and play baseball or something? Then, I realized something. Wait, where's Candy? Our beloved cat, Candy, was nowhere to be found. When I asked Steve and the others, everyone claimed they hadn't seen her. As I searched for Candy, my nephew informed me, "Well, when Grandpa opened the window to smoke outside, Candy just slipped out." My brother-in-law glared at his son, who shared this information, as if he was saying something outrageous. "Why would you do that? I've told you to be careful when opening the windows," I said, tears welling up. To that, Steve indifferently replied, "Well, if it's about a cat, we can just get a new one. Why are you making such a fuss? If you want a divorce, that's fine by me." Steve said this with a smirk. I challenged his provocative attitude. "Did you just say divorce?" "Yeah, I did. If you're willing to apologize, maybe I'll reconsider," he replied. How he and his family could be so confident, smirking proudly, was beyond me. However, calmly I said, "Is that so? Then sign this," presenting the divorce papers already signed by me. I went to retrieve my packed bags from the room and told Steve calmly, "Have you signed it? Why haven't you signed it yet?" "I'm busy, you know." My preparedness surprised Steve and his parents. As Steve struggled to hide his irritation at my provocation, his mother exclaimed, "Steve, divorce this foolish wife quickly. The house is completed. We don't need her anymore. You'll regret getting divorced." Steve remarked, "But there was nothing for me to regret." "What are you talking about? You're the one who'll be in trouble. Just sign the divorce papers," I responded. After ensuring Steve signed the divorce papers, I stored them in my bag, then approached my brother-in-law, presenting another set of papers. "Please sign this as well." "What? When did we get married?" My brother-in-law, laughing, looked at the filled-out wife section. "Hey, Vanessa, this is..." Vanessa, with a cold gaze, urged him to sign the divorce papers. "We're getting a divorce. Please sign it quickly." "Vanessa, this betrayal is unforgivable." My father-in-law condemned, but Vanessa remained resolute in her decision. Even I could see that Vanessa was treated like a domestic worker in her own home. Most of the income she earned was handed over to her husband, except for a small amount allocated to household expenses. He squandered that money as he pleased, and the unknown woman sitting on the sofa turned out to be his mistress. "Janet, it seems my husband is having an affair." Vanessa confided this to me just before Steve proposed building a house. Prioritizing her children, Vanessa had endured in silence. However, she recently discovered that her husband was selling her personal belongings and even the children's toys to profit for himself, pushing her to her breaking point. Then Vanessa shared something with me, igniting my anger. From that moment, we began working towards our divorces. Vanessa focused on gathering evidence of the affair. The business trip she mentioned earlier was actually a lie. We met at the station and went to look for a new place to live. Like me, Vanessa had no parents to turn to but decided to move out of the state based on a job offer from a close friend she had confided in. It was a very pleasant location. Everything went according to plan, and we were at the final step, submitting the divorce papers. "I want to take some people out of that miserable place," Vanessa resolved with renewed determination. I saw the strength hidden inside her. Despite appearing fragile on the surface, she possessed a strong heart, suppressed and almost brainwashed by her in-laws' harsh treatment. We staggered our return home, with Vanessa going back first. She informed me that our home had been effectively taken over and my brother-in-law's mistress was living there openly. All our interactions had been an act, fully aware of the circumstances. I told Vanessa, "You don't have to live there anymore. Let the kids enjoy drawing on the walls as much as they want." Seeing my brother-in-law contentedly signing the divorce papers while imagining his new life with his mistress, I felt a cold satisfaction. "Let's go, Vanessa. Grandpa and Grandma, please come with us." I called them out, and they stood up, guiding Vanessa and her children to the entrance. "I thought staying with you people would ruin our lives." Vanessa's words woke me up. "Do as you please from now on," grandfather coldly told the rest of family while making their way out. It turned out the rest of the family had been dipping into the grandparents' finances as well. Such unforgivable behavior. "Goodbye, take care." As we left, they laughed, saying, "You will regret this." But we ignored them, gathered our belongings, and left the house. Months later, I received a call from my ex-husband. Oh, I forgot to block his number. I had a good idea of what the call was about, but when I answered, a frantic Steve said, "Janet, come back." I couldn't help but laugh. "Come back? We're strangers now." I replied calmly, only for his mother to snatch the phone. "What do you mean? Why aren't you paying the mortgage?" "Excuse me? I don't understand what you're talking about." I feigned ignorance, and she couldn't hide her irritation. It turned out the mortgage was already in arrears. My ex-husband was claiming I was responsible for the missed payments, which was absurd. While I stayed silent, the mother-in-law ranted nonstop. "What's this house? You said your household income was $75,000, right? We should have had a much better home. It's so disappointing for a newly built home." They had planned to acquire that house from the beginning. Vanessa had informed me of my husband and in-law's scheming. Indeed, but with your son's annual income of $30,000, the bank wouldn't lend much. If we had taken out the mortgage jointly, maybe we could have built a better house. Hearing this, the mother-in-law shouted, "Steve, what's this about? This isn't what we discussed." I could hear my ex-husband and former mother-in-law arguing over the phone. Ignoring that, I hung up the phone and made sure to block his number. My ex-husband always wanted to appear favorable in others' eyes, though not so much with family. But his desire to be seen positively by outsiders was abnormally strong. When I mentioned building a house, I had already been contemplating divorce. Unbeknownst to my ex-husband, I provoked him by saying, "A friend's husband took out a mortgage by himself. That's impressive, isn't it?" Perhaps wanting to make a good impression on the banker, he decided to take out the mortgage himself. It was hard to contain my laughter. He must have been terrified to reveal the truth to his family, but for me, it was a trivial matter. The house that was built disregarded my preferences and was based on my ex-husband's tastes. Hence, I had no attachment to that house. Since my ex-husband didn't cheat, I didn't receive compensation after the divorce. Angered by this fact, I left him with the burden of the mortgage as a form of revenge. I thought he deserved to suffer. Moreover, being able to take Vanessa, whom I considered like a sister, out of that house was my greatest victory. Eventually, the mortgage payments became impossible, and the new house was foreclosed. The interior was covered in graffiti, and the walls were stained yellow from the cigarettes smoked by my former brother-in-law and his mistress. The house was in a state of disrepair, far from what one would expect from a new home. My ex-husband rented a cheap room, but I heard that my former in-laws also moved in with him. It seems he will never be free from them. They are now strangers to me, so I'm not concerned about their fate. The only redeeming quality of my former in-laws was that they didn't harm the children. Other than that, they were the worst kind of people. Vanessa, my former brother-in-law's ex-wife, pursued compensation through legal means against him and his mistress. It appears they managed to pay the amount by borrowing from acquaintances. This was welcome news. The incident made them outcasts in the community, and now their whereabouts are unknown. They haven't repaid their loans, causing dissatisfaction among those they owe. Vanessa is now living fulfilling days working at a friend's company. Her children are growing up healthily, and I wish her all the happiness in the future. My former grandparents seem brighter, as if a burden has been lifted, enjoying a new life with the funds from the sold house and their secret savings. As for me, I requested a transfer to a local office. Surprisingly, my beloved cat Candy is with me. After sharing information about Candy on social media, I found out that a local person had been caring for her. I'm so glad Candy is a friendly cat. Now, I live alone in the house my late father built in my hometown, and with my brother's approval, I'm close to saving enough to build my own home. I hope to introduce someone special at my father's grave someday, and I continue to work hard every day.